Once upon a time there was a young boy named Tommy who loved exploring the woods behind his house. Every day after school, Tommy would venture into the forest and discover new plants and animals. He felt like the forest was his own magical kingdom. One day, Tommy decided to explore deeper into the woods than he ever had before. The trees were very tall and close together, blocking out most of the sunlight. Tommy felt a chill run down his spine as he walked further into the dark forest. The only sounds were the wind rustling the leaves and the occasional snapping twig under Tommy's feet. As Tommy went deeper, he started to feel like someone or something was watching him. He looked around nervously but didn't see anyone else in the silent woods. Suddenly, Tommy heard a loud groaning noise, like a tree branch creaking under a heavy weight. He froze, listening closely. The noise came again, even louder. It sounded like it was right above Tommy. Heart pounding, Tommy slowly looked up into the tree branches towering above him. He thought he could make out a dark shape crouching on a thick branch. The shape moved slightly and Tommy stumbled backwards in fear. Hello? Tommy called out nervously. Is someone there? The dark shape suddenly dropped down from the tree, landing with a heavy thud on the ground. Tommy cried out in surprise. But as the shape moved into a patch of light, Tommy saw it was just a large, black raven. The raven cocked its head and squawked loudly at Tommy, flapping its wings. Tommy sighed with relief, feeling silly he had gotten so scared. You startled me, bird, Tommy said, holding a hand over his racing heart. I thought you were a creepy forest monster. The raven just squawked again and took off flying deeper into the woods. Tommy watched it disappear into the trees. Feeling braver now, he continued his adventure into the forest. Tommy walked for what felt like hours, rambling up and down steep hillsides covered in huge boulders and exposed roots. He was amazed by the variety of exotic plants that grew all around. Vines curled around the trunks of massive trees and colorful wildflowers blanketed the forest floor. Tommy wondered if he was still in the same woods behind his house. Eventually, Tommy came to a bubbling creek cutting through the trees. The sound of the running water echoed through the quiet forest. Tommy was mesmerized watching small silvery fish dart through the clear water. He had never been this deep into the forest before. He wondered just how far back the woods went. As Tommy stood admiring the creek, he noticed movement on the opposite bank. He narrowed his eyes, peering into the shadows of the trees. There was a small creature hunched over the water's edge. As it moved into a patch of sunlight, Tommy saw it was a tiny humanoid figure, only about a foot tall. Tommy watched in amazement as the tiny creature cupped its hands and drank from the creek. He couldn't believe his eyes. The only explanation was that this must be one of the forest gnomes he had read about in books. Tommy always thought they were just fairy tales, but now he was seeing one for real. The tiny gnome had a fluffy white beard, pointy red hat, and was dressed in brown and green clothing. It was the most amazing thing Tommy had ever seen. He wanted to get a closer look. Slowly and quietly, Tommy crept across the creek, trying not to scare the little gnome. He hid behind a tree and peeked around to get a better view. The gnome didn't seem to notice Tommy, and was now pulling a small fishing net out of its pack. Just then, Tommy leaned forward a bit too far, snapping a twig beneath his foot. The sharp sound made the gnome's head snap up in alarm. When it spotted Tommy, its eyes went wide with shock. "Wait, don't run away," Tommy called out, afraid he had ruined his chance. But it was too late. The gnome had already scurried into the bushes and out of sight. Tommy sighed in disappointment. Feeling let down that the gnome had disappeared, Tommy decided he had gone far enough into the forest for one day. He began to head back the way he came, using the creek as a guide. As Tommy hiked upstream, the depth and speed of the water steadily increased. Soon, he came to a large waterfall cascading down from an enormous rock ledge. He stopped to admire the beautiful natural wonder. The water tumbled over the cliff into a large, clear pool below. Looking around, Tommy saw a narrow pathway leading up alongside the waterfall. He eagerly started climbing up the rocky path, wanting to see the view from the top of the cliff. The higher he went, the louder the roaring of the massive waterfall grew. Finally, Tommy pulled himself up onto the top of the ledge. He gasped in amazement at the incredible vista before him. He could see for miles across an endless expanse of green treetops. Tommy felt like he was on top of the world. After taking in the breathtaking view, Tommy carefully made his way back down the cliffside path. He continued following the creek back downstream through the woods. Tommy was starting to worry about how late it was getting. The shadows were growing longer and the light was dimmer. He picked up his pace, hoping he could find his way back before it got too dark. Just then, Tommy heard loud snarls and grunts nearby. He froze, listening closely. The noises were coming from a thicket just up ahead. Tommy stood absolutely still, terrified to make a sound. Through the bushes, Tommy could see 3 large wild boars sniffing around the base of a tree. With their huge tusks and coarse fur, they looked very mean and dangerous. Tommy knew he had to get away without being noticed. Moving as quietly as possible, Tommy began backing away from the boars. He winced as a twig cracked loudly beneath his foot. The boars' heads all snapped in his direction. They had spotted him. The boars reared up and charged toward Tommy, kicking up dirt with their hooves as they ran. Tommy turned and sprinted away in terror, his heart pounding wildly. He could hear the boars getting closer, grunting furiously as they chased him through the trees. Tommy pushed himself to run faster. If he tripped or stumbled now, he was done for. Up ahead, Tommy spotted the hollowed-out trunk of a fallen tree. Just big enough for him to squeeze inside. Quickly, he scrambled into the log and curled up, making himself as small as possible. A few moments later, the boars trampled past his hiding spot in a frenzied stampede. Tommy stayed absolutely still, holding his breath. Finally, the sounds of the angry boars faded into the distance. Tommy poked his head out and sighed with relief when he saw they were gone. That had been a close call. Now desperate to get back home before any other creatures showed up, Tommy moved quickly through the woods. The sun was going down and it was getting very hard to see where he was going. Just as the last light was fading away, Tommy stumbled into a familiar clearing. He laughed happily when he saw his house just up ahead. He had made it back safely from the depths of the forest. Tommy snuck quietly inside and up to his room to avoid worrying his parents. He collapsed onto his bed, exhausted from his long adventure. As he drifted off to sleep, he dreamed of the wondrous things he had seen that day. Tommy knew the forest held many more secrets left to uncover. He could hardly wait for his next magical journey into the woods.